this country. There might be some places where it's a business for some segment of road. But maybe broadband shouldn't be a business. But the issue then is, if corporations haven't made broadband a business, is the government smart enough to? Because, you know, to be a business, you have to either invest a certain amount of money and then make a return off of that, or go bankrupt and still make a return off of it, which is sort of the best case. You know, you get all the upfront for the investor's standpoint in terms of, some people have said that the stock market boom was what built the internet, and to some extent that's true. There are a lot of investors that poured a lot of money in, and the folks that took their money out early made profits. A huge amount was invested in hundreds of billions in infrastructure. But at the end of the day, are they sustainable businesses? That's the question. Today, you know, we have WorldCom writing down their assets by 75% or something like that, and that does not portend for, you know, being a real clean ride going forward. So there's still pressure on their business models, and without new funds coming in, I think the governments are going to be asked whether or not they need to stabilize the industry, as one of the fellows, Ellie Noam from Columbia University, has suggested that governments will be impelled to re-regulate because of the destabilization that's occurred in the markets, the broader markets from the telecom losses. But will they know the right way to restabilize, and is it merely reintegrating? I mean, if there's something that's fundamentally wrong, then it could be more problematic.
If I can make a comment here. I think it's clear that broadband is a business, and the reason I say that is that there have been suggestions in various communities for the community to install their own DSL service.
Right.
And SBC opposes it. And it's clear why they oppose it, because they want control, because they think there's money to be made there.
Right.
Okay? I happen to be fortunate enough to be in a community where the cable service is provided as part of the city, and they also provide, therefore, cable modem. It's great service. The rates are cheap. I'm sure that individual communities can install their own broadband service. It's not too difficult.
Right.
And the fact that the big phone companies oppose this vehemently says to me that they think there's money to be made.
Well, what company that's doing a business wouldn't oppose the government getting into their business? I think that's true of any company.
Well, if they thought they couldn't make money on it, they wouldn't care.
Actually, an explanation of exactly what you're saying is slightly different.
Okay.
And that is, right now, the phone companies are losing a lot of money to traffic that's being siphoned off on voice over IP and stuffed back up through DSL links, among other things. And so what's happened is that now they're competing with their own core network.
Yes.
They can't charge a premium for voice anymore, and that kind of cuts them to a quick. So they don't want to compete against themselves at under their own price point. They're actually under cost more than anything. And that's a real killer for them right now. So they may take out the threat, knowing that long term they could lose their entire business that way because of pricing difference.
Right. That's a challenge for broadband, because the price of a broadband bit is much cheaper than the price of a narrowband bit versus the price of a telephone bit. I'm just not sure what's going to come out. I think there's a huge amount of activity, not only at the municipal level, but at the county and regional and the state. Various.
I think it's still true that businesses think broadband is a business.
I don't doubt it, and I believe that we're in the sort of we're still infatuated by the boom period, even though we've reached the bust period with respect to investor sentiment. I think that there's the conference in January, PTC, people couldn't agree about it, virtually anything. I mean, the definition of broadband, how it should be regulated, whether there was a business. There was no agreement. There really was no agreement other than that you know, it's got to be the future. So I think we're in one of those phases in the development of this global network age where, because of the requirements of the bust, there's going to be forced sensibility, economic sensibility, but the aversion to risk means that fixes are also going to be difficult too, because if the fix is something that's out of character and requires further investment, then it's going to be harder. So one of the interesting points here, most traditional policy discussions involve an industry group and maybe the the individuals that buy from that group or sell to that group or something. Here, we really have two major industries, but the telecom is much more major in terms of the volume of dollars than Hollywood. And what's interesting is that both of them competing with one another are going to point at all the weaknesses of the other's argument, to the extent that you may actually get a rebalancing between corporate interests and individual interests. Specifically look at the copyright issue of, I think it's about 90-some years now. It used to be 14 years back of 100 years ago. So in the time of 100 years, we've gone from 14 to nearly 100 years of the length, and that's where the fact that maybe absolute power can corrupt absolutely means that the industries that have such a long time horizon of ownership of intellectual property and some expression of copyright, with the copyright definition over that time period being expanded and expanded and expanded, even include software, it means that they have a pretty strong hold on those intellectual property goods, and there are some that would argue that should be, curtailed. And so it'll be interesting to see if the dialogues, even publicly, go to the extent of truly getting policymakers to discuss those issues in public forums. And have people seen these issues being discussed by policymakers in public forums?
Well, Professor Lessig recently was put against in the Supreme Court. And in terms of the version of copyright, the Sonny Bono Act is what was really challenging in terms of the traditional view of copyright and the lifetime. And they what was it, an 8-1 decision against it.
Sonny Bono Act, I think, was also called the American Home Recording Act.
It was a very good challenge. It was actually a very fundamental challenge. The court very clearly ruled that they didn't want to hear such, that they thought that the legislative branch really was speaking for this issue. And so while it's created a lot of interest in terms of communications, you can read his weblog and the discussions there, and I can talk to him about this, it's very clear that that door for them now is closed.
I'm not sure I understood entirely everything you said, but can I bring out one of the things about Audio Home Recording Act, Sonny Bono too, that when I tried to synthesize the range of copyright legislations which have come from sort of looking at a specific implementation of a technology and then trying to generalize effectively when you write something that either you can copy, you can't copy, you can copy little, or you can copy badly. Those are kind of the range of real distinct types of regulations that come out. And the regulations really span the spectrum, and the proposals span the spectrum, which tells me that there's not really a strongly centered approach to whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. In some cases, you can copy as much as you want, but the intellectual property industry actually gets money from the sales of the units of the. I think that was part of the Sonny Bono Act, was that the tape machines and the cassettes themselves, there would be a royalty.
His issue was one of the extension of the time.
Specifically the length of it.
Yeah, specifically the time granted, because under the original
part of that act
constitutional
extended
acts, this was actually a very constrained period for certain competitiveness reasons of exclusivity.
And Congress didn't want to hear
extended.
shortening it.
Yeah, he wants it shortened.
Lessig does.
That was the pivotal ruling. He had very good arguments. He's a Stanford law professor, and the Supreme Court, what was it, a month ago?
I think the question was, is extending the length of copyright constitutionally allowed?
Right.
And the ruling was it's constitutionally allowed.
Right. So in the Constitution, the thing that I think is very fundamental that does not, that goes against extending it, is that copyrights, by virtue of the Amendment for Free Speech, is the point of it is to advance science and art. So there's the question, are you really advancing science and art by enabling the main expression of media and the main vehicles of media to be so centralized that they can put up SpongeBob and all these sort of things, rather than having more scientific and artful expressions that might be more available if there are greater diversity in ownership, which possibly would come from also having shortened copyright periods, because then you wouldn't have as strong an industry that could then be so powerful against other alternatives. Does that make any sense?
I think the argument was maybe, you know, Disney's motive was what you were saying, the concentration of power that they wanted to hold on to their rights. But the argument against it is, do you promote the arts if by giving them a copyright of 90 years, which is longer than the expected life of the artist?
Well, you could argue that, you know, that's one of those, you can argue both ways. You know, it promotes the development of science because the guys are going to have 95 years.
So copyrights protect the owner, not the artist. And the owner could be a corporation that has an indefinite life.
Yeah, so now Disney has protected the 1930s Mickey Mouse movies decades after the artists have died.
Right. So to me, it doesn't speak naturally that you are really protecting the intentions of the writers of the Constitution, because it doesn't seem like you're really promoting science and art if you have such a long period. That's my own personal bias in that question.
The point of it is that he was ruled against very strongly.
Right.
And there's been a lot of legal articles and discussions on this in the last month or two. But that is not going to, that's very unlikely to be changed this time. One can't do it, like they've already, he did a wonderful case. One has to start looking at other alternatives now. And you can talk about how they should shorten copyright periods. It's just not going to happen anytime soon.
And it points to the way our legal system, or our governance, and our corporations are closely tied today. But if people begin thinking about the importance of how media flows, the importance of Hollywood and how Hollywood impacts society, and how we and our children interrelate and our societies interrelate, then recognizing that and having more advancement of a dialogue regarding that can possibly get some different rebalancing.
And that's why this case was very
Right.
successful in that sense.
The other point here is that Hollywood is nowhere near the point of being comfortable with the current situation, as you pointed out earlier. And even though there might be opportunities for fast-moving amounts of money to be made off of derivative works, which would feed into their coffers in even more powerful ways than their traditional business models would allow, they're not able to focus on even a tiny bit of that. I mean, that's where the flux of the net can be tremendously effective,
Right.
especially with all of the media components that are being added to it right now by developers. For the past 10 years, have been some fantastic work done. And a fraction of that is leveraged by that community when it could be more strongly leveraged. They're not seeing it. They won't see it until they make sure that they get their conventional business model reestablished with the web being there.
Right. So there's a question whether or not some other society that sees that there's a possible paradigm shift going on will be earlier to adopt the new paradigm and therefore rebalance the global balance of powers in media. So to look at how closely telecom and Hollywood actually come together, I wanted to define telecom and entertainment with these two phrases, telecom and broadband, as a shared information infrastructure that people pay to access. And entertainment is shared content or information that people pay to access. If you think about it in those terms, you realize how synergistic the one is to the other. What's resulted then have been the regulatory regimes in telecommunications. When those telecommunications industries have primarily involved entertainment content, there have been a lot more there have been a lot more things that relate to the interaction of the codependency, the two program access rules for cable operators, must carry ownership limits. So there's already some reflection of the codependence, but we're at a stage now where we're even